chapter 273 of Shrimadbhagavatam, Avadhuta Gita, part 2. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. A real detached person will not go in search of the pleasures of the senses. He should be indifferent to everything. Like the python which eats what comes its way, whether it is tasty or not, whether it is small or big, the python never goes out of its way to get food for itself, nor does it make any special attempt to satisfy its hunger. This was the lesson I learned from the python. Even so, man should be satisfied with what he gets, and he should never go in pursuit of worldly things. The python does not grieve if it does not get food daily, but waits with patience. Even starving for days together without thinking that it is a misfortune. Man should also have the fortitude to put up with the fact that he will be denied many of the so-called good things in life. The really wise man should learn to control his desires, the senses, to such an extent that he should forget that they even exist. Though his senses are alert, though his mind is active, though his body has strength, still, man should so school these that he should be sleeping as far as they are concerned. Not only sleeping, but inert. He should have but one desire, moksha, and this should be his aim. A wise man should appear like the ocean. His surface should be clear and lucid, but he should be so deep that no one can gauge the depth. Meaning, a man should appear as though he is very simple. Since he does not behave as the others do, the sensible men of the world, he will appear simple to the common man. But his thoughts should be so deep that no one can guess what they are. No one should be able to cross him in his purpose, and since he will be a spiritual giant, nothing should be able to upset him or cause any kind of disturbance in his mind, in his mental makeup. Meaning, the senses and the objects of the senses should be powerless to upset him or cause any kind of disturbance in his mind. When the rainy season fills the mountain torrents with water, they rush down in tumult, but they do not cause any tumult in the sea when they empty themselves into it. And when in summertime the waters flowing into the sea are scanty, the sea does not decrease in level. Even so, when in the grip of the passions, man should not let it affect him, nor should he be depressed when his desires are frustrated. Woman who has been created is the personification of the Maya of the Lord, and as such, she is indeed tempting. If a man loses his power of reasoning and thinking and falls a victim to her charms, he is destroyed even as the moth that flits with a flame. This is the lesson which a moth taught me. The 5 indriyas, the sense organs, are for seeing, smelling, touching, hearing, and tasting. The moth is destroyed as a result of the sense of sight which beguiles it. So does the man, since his eyes betray him into foolishness. When one eats, one should take in only the amount which is necessary to keep body and soul together. And man should eat this slowly, very slowly, and not swallow it all in one single mouthful. The honeybee collects the honey from the flowers. He does not, however, beggar them of all the honey they have, nor does he become avaricious. He takes only what he needs, and in bargain he is careful not to hurt the flower from which he takes the honey. Even so, a real sannyasi should accept from the grihastha, the family man, just so much and not more, and he should not embrace the host. Even as a honeybee collects honey from all flowers, small or big, even so man should cull knowledge from the big and the small. All the shastras must be studied, and he should take from them what he thinks is the essence of them. If a man tries to save up for tomorrow, he will come to ruin. When he gets food, the sannyasi should not keep off it by saying, I will eat this tonight, or it will serve me for tomorrow. This is wrong. His hand should form the begging bowl, and his stomach should be the vessel wherein the food is stored. If he does not do this, he will come to grief like the honey bee. If man collects wealth and does not give it to others, nor enjoys it himself, he is like the honey bee. The man is foolish, since his wealth will be taken by one who is stronger than him. The wise man knows how to make others work for him, like the keeper of a beehive makes the bee work for him and benefits by their work. A real sannyasi should not touch, even with his toes, the figure of a woman, even if it is a doll made of wood. If he does so, he will fall like the male elephant, which is lured into a pit by the sight of a female elephant. Even beautiful music and music which has been sung with a desire to please the senses should not be heard by a sannyasi. His mind will be, without his knowledge, bent towards the many temptations that comes his way, and, like a deer caught in a net, he will be caught in the meshes of delusion. No one is exempt from this rule. The great rishis, Vibhandaka, had a son by name Rishyashringa, whom he had brought up as innocent as the deer he lived with. And yet, even this young innocent man was lured away from the side of his father by music and dancing, which were meant to tempt him. The fish is tempted by the piece of meat placed as a bait, and it is easily caught. Man should be aware of the sense of taste. To eat less is the first lesson one should learn. Even the wise man can conquer all his other senses, but this one sense, the one sense organ, the tongue, is not easy to control. It is a strange quality of this organ that even when it is starved, it feeds on thoughts of food. A Jitendriya, one who has conquered his senses, is in reality one whose taste buds have been destroyed by self-control. The time-honored examples of the tyranny of the senses are the bee, the elephant, the moth, and the fish. The sense of smell is responsible for the downfall of the bee, which rushes to the flower with which bears the scent. The touch of the female elephant is enough to drag the male elephant into the pit. Sound kills the deer. The lion roars with its mouth on the ground, and the deer, not knowing where it comes from, rushes towards the lion and gets killed. The fish is tempted by the sense of taste. The piece of meat which is the bait really is the cause of its undoing. As for the moth, the sense of sight kills it. The sight of flame is enough to destroy it completely. When just the single sense and its potency is enough to destroy it completely, the one who has succumbed to it, what then can one say about the condition of man, beset as he is on all sides by the objects of the five senses, and himself possessing no strength to resist them? Unless he is alert always, waking or sleeping, man will fall into these pits and gets lost. There was once a dancing girl by name Pingala in the country by name Vaideha. Her profession was such that she had to make her living out of men who paid for their pleasure. One night, she dressed herself up with great care, as it was very necessary in her profession. And, as was her custom, with a desire to tempt some man into her house, she stood at the doorstep looking at the passer-by. She wanted money, and so she was set on finding a rich man who would look at her and come into her house to please himself and at the same time make her rich. For a long time she waited, but no one came. She would go into the house and come out again, and all the while she searched for someone who would look at her and come in. And so passed half the night. Pingala was very unhappy. Her face was drawn with disappointment and her eyes filled with tears of anger and frustration. Suddenly she became disgusted with herself, and noble thoughts came to her mind. She said, a person who has not realized the aloneness of Atman is fit for nothing. He will never be able to shed the love he has for his possessions like wife, wealth, children, home, and so on. He will not be able to give up the love he has for his own body. Look at myself. I have never been able to control the course of my mind in the wrong paths. In my desire to enjoy the pleasures of the body with a man, I have abandoned the Lord and have become foolish and obstinate. What a fool I am! Inside me is the Lord who will ever be mine and who will grant me moksha. And having him inside me, I have been blind and deaf. I have all these days been going in search of mere mortal men to give me happiness. For the sake of this doubtful pleasure which lasts for a moment, which is ever accompanied by pain, sadness, and misery, I have abandoned the Lord and submitted this body of mine to endless indignities. This body of mine, which is like a house built of bamboo sticks, tied loosely and covered with a thin skin, this body is made up of water and blood and bones. To gratify this body, I have lost sight of the Lord, who still has the mercy to live inside this disgusting shell called the body. I will not be foolish anymore. I will no longer think on the things of the world which do but decay soon. That I should have had my eyes opened now is indeed proof that the Lord has not forgotten me, though I had forgotten him till now. The troubles I have had are but the blessings sent to me by him, or else I would never have come back to the right path so soon. And so, with the sudden realization of the foolishness of years, Pingala abandoned all her desires and went to bed, deciding that she would think on the Lord and no one else. Even like her, one should give up thoughts on earthly things and set one's mind on the Lord. This is the way to gain peace. When a man becomes fond of some object in his possession, that very possession will cause him unhappiness. Once he abandons it, he gains happiness. This lesson I learnt from a kurrari. This small being had a piece of meat with it. Birds, which were larger and stronger than it, surrounded the kurrari and went on pecking it. It suffered the harassment for a while and held on to the piece of meat. But when it became unbearable, it gave up its hold on the piece of meat. At once, at that very moment, the birds which were torturing it so long left it in peace, and the kurrari went on its way without a care. I have no possessions, and I am not affected by praise of others or by their censure. I have no wife and children to claim my affection. I am happy in the thought that I am free of the bondages which are earthly, and that is why I look so happy and tranquil. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Shri Krishna Arpanamastu. Chapter 274 of Shrimadbhagavatam, Avadhuta Gita, Part 3. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. I will tell you about the lesson that I learnt from a young girl. There was a young girl who was left alone in the house while her parents had gone out somewhere. They had been to some place nearby and they were to come back only the next day. When she was alone, unexpected guests arrived in her house and she had to entertain them. There was no rice ready in the house. The young girl went to the backyard and tried to pound some grains. She was trying to do this in secret, lest her guests should know it. But the bangles in her hand slid down to her waist and threatened to expose her poverty by making music while she plied her pestle. Promptly, she broke most of them, and with just 2 bangles on each hand, she continued her work. Even those 2 made some noise. She then broke 1 on each wrist. The single bangle did not make any noise, and she could do her work noiselessly. The lesson I learned from this young girl was priceless. Living with many people will only cause quarrels and dissatisfaction. Even two people are enough to cause conversation, which may lead to two people, which may lead to unpleasantness later. So, like the single bangle on the girl's wrist, one should be alone in this world. Concentration is essential if one desires to attain oneness with the Paramatman. If man desires to attain the Brahmi state, he must perceive the oneness with the other Atman, and for each and for reaching the Samadhi, concentration is essential. The breath should first be brought under control, pranayama. This makes the mind to be brought under control. The mind will lose its vikshepa, its fickleness, by renouncing the objects of the senses. This comes only by practice. When it is awake, the mind is never steady, but moves from object to object, from thought to thought, from one thing to another. It is ever restless. In the dream state, the mind is rarer, no doubt, but it is involved in a world of its own, peopled by its own creations. In the deep sleep state, the mind lies dormant. It is inactive, but only as long as it is in that state. This is the condition of man's mind. But a mind which is by practice brought under control to such an extent that it has on its own accord given up desires, the vasanas, which accompany one from janma to janma because of the karma we have performed, is free. Then it can be free of the gunas also easily and become pure sattva, which is only one step less than becoming one with the dhyeha, the absolute. This lesson I gathered from an archer who, when taking aim, did not know what was happening around him. This archer did not know that a king had passed him by. He was so intent on aiming at the target that nothing engaged his attention except the thought that his arrow should hit his target. A snake avoids the company of men since it is highly suspicious of their intentions. It is alone and has no dwelling place of its own. It never transgresses any rule and it lives alone with itself. Even so, should a sannyasi live alone, without contact with another human being, he should not have a home of his own, because that is only the beginning of other bondages. He should try to be as much away from the world of men as possible by living in caves, hermitages, and such like. The dehin, the dweller in the body, when it begins to think of some object intensely to the exclusion of everything else, becomes like the object thought of, like the worm which the wasp captures and keeps in its shell, becomes out of fear like the wasp itself in course of time. When the mind thinks on the Paramatman with intense concentration, it will, in course of time, become one with it. The spider taught me the final lesson. I was watching him. He was sitting quietly on a piece of twig of a tree. Suddenly, when there was a slight breeze, he spat out some thin filament out of itself, and swinging in the breeze, it reached another twig, and between the two twigs, it travelled to and fro, and in a very short time built a web. A few days later, I saw the same spider eating up the threads and undoing the web, and soon there was nothing left of the very beautiful web it had woven. Even so, the Paramatman, he has no desires and he is beyond the reach of cause and effect. At the end of the kalpa, there is nothing. When the equilibrium of the gunas is upset by time, it is called maya, and the Paramatman manifests himself in the form of the Mahat Tattva and the Aham Tattva and the entire universe made up of the elements, and at the end of the kalpa, he withdraws into himself the universe. The Avadhuta continued, O king, These are the lessons which I learned from the 24 gurus I mentioned, and I have been practicing what I have learned. This body of mine has its own lesson to teach, has also been studied by me. It is the base, the foundation on which one's very life exists, and yet, when the Atman leaves the body, it becomes fit only to be the food of animals or worms, or it becomes a handful of ashes. I therefore gave up all the attachment to the body. For the sake of pleasing the body, man spends endless time and energy. He finds a wife, son, wealth, cows, servants, house, and friends. All these are assembled with great difficulty, and man takes very good care of them. And what does this body do? This wooden case, created by karmas of his previous birth, binds him to another body in his next birth, and, without any consideration for the man who built it, decays and dies. Consider the man who is fond of his body. To pacify the tongue, he is drawn in one direction and in search of water, since the throat is parched. The sex urge pulls him one way, and stomach bothers him in another manner. The ears want good music, pleasant for them to listen to, and the noise wants him to provide